February 1945. Leyte, Philippine Islands. The rain fell in sheets across the muddy field hospital, drumming against canvas tents stretched tight over wooden frames. Inside, beneath the dim glow of kerosene lamps swaying with each gust of wind, a young Japanese woman lay motionless on a cot, her uniform torn and stained dark with blood and rain. Her eyes were open but unseeing, staring at the canvas ceiling as if willing herself to disappear into it. Around her, American voices moved with practiced efficiency. Low, calm, unhurried. One voice drew closer. A man's voice. She turned her head slowly, and through the haze of pain and shock, she saw him. A young American soldier, no more than 23, wearing a Red Cross armband, kneeling beside her cot with clean bandages in his hands. He smiled gently, speaking words she could not understand, and reached toward the wound on her shoulder. She flinched violently, her body recoiling as if his touch were fire itself. The nurse paused, his hand hovering in the air between them, and in that suspended moment, two worlds collided, not with violence, but with something far more disorienting. Kindness. This was not what she had been told would happen. This was not what any of them had been told. For years, the women who served the Empire of Japan, nurses, communication officers, administrative clerks, and support personnel, had been raised on stories of the enemy's savagery. The Americans, they were taught, were barbaric beasts who respected nothing, honored nothing, spared nothing. Women captured by them would face fates worse than death. It was a truth repeated in training camps, whispered in barracks, and written into the very fabric of their duty. To serve until the last breath, and if capture loomed, to choose death with honor rather than submit to dishonor at the hands of the white devils. The small cyanide capsules many carried were not merely tools of last resort. They were symbols of devotion, proof that they valued the emperor's honor above their own lives. Death was preferable. Death was noble. Surrender was unthinkable. Yet here, in the wreckage of war's final chapter in the Pacific, these women found themselves alive and in enemy hands, and nothing that followed matched the nightmare they had been promised. The inclusion of women in Japan's military apparatus had been gradual, a necessity born of total war. By 1943, as Japan's industrial base strained under the weight of prolonged conflict and its manpower reserves dwindled, the imperial military began mobilizing women in unprecedented numbers. They were not frontline combatants. Japanese doctrine still reserved that role for men. But they became indispensable in auxiliary capacities. Women served as field nurses, tending to wounded soldiers in makeshift hospitals mere miles from the front. They operated communication equipment, decoding messages and relaying orders across vast oceanic distances. They worked in supply depots, munitions factories, and administrative offices, keeping the machinery of empire running even as that machinery ground toward collapse. Some were volunteers, inspired by patriotic fervor and the promise of serving something greater than themselves. Others were conscripted, their participation framed as duty rather than choice. All were bound by the same code: loyalty to the emperor, obedience to the state, and an unwavering belief in the righteousness of their cause. The training these women received was rigorous, though its focus differed sharply from that of male soldiers. Where men were taught to kill, women were taught to endure. They learned medical techniques, how to staunch bleeding, how to splint broken bones, how to recognize the early signs of infection in tropical climates where wounds festered quickly. They learned to operate radios and cipher machines, to maintain meticulous records even under bombardment, to keep calm when chaos reigned. But woven through every lesson was a darker thread: the certainty of what awaited them if they fell into enemy hands. Instructors spoke plainly of rape and torture, of humiliation and degradation. They described American soldiers as men devoid of honor, driven by base instincts, incapable of recognizing women as anything other than objects. The message was clear and unambiguous. Capture was a fate worse than death. If the tide turned, if retreat became impossible, if surrender loomed, there was always the capsule, always the grenade, always the cliff's edge. Better to die with dignity than live in shame.